Snow fell gently on Christmas Eve, coating the suburban neighborhood in a blanket of white that sparkled under the amber glow of street lamps. Inside a modest two-story house on Maple Street, two 7-year-old girls pressed their noses against the living room window, their breath fogging the glass as they watched the world transform into a winter wonderland. Emma and Lily were identical twins, with long chestnut hair tied in matching red ribbons and green Christmas sweaters adorned with reindeer. Their father, Daniel, had bought those sweaters just days before, trying his best to make this Christmas special despite the void that had existed in their lives for as long as they could remember. The house smelled of pine from the freshly cut tree standing tall in the corner, decorated with ornaments the girls had made in school, popcorn strings they'd crafted together, and lights that blinked in rhythmic patterns. Christmas music played softly from the kitchen radio, where Daniel was preparing hot chocolate, stirring the pot with careful attention while glancing occasionally at his daughters through the doorway. He had learned to do everything alone over the years, to be both mother and father, to answer questions he didn't always have answers for, to fill gaps that seemed impossible to fill. Outside, a woman stood at the corner of the street, her dark coat dusted with snowflakes, her hands buried deep in her pockets. She was in her early 30s, with auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes that carried the weight of years spent wondering and waiting. Her name was Sarah, and she had come here tonight after 7 years of searching, 7 years of private investigators and dead ends, 7 years of piecing together fragments of a life she had been forced to leave behind. She watched the house from a distance, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the muffled sounds of the neighborhood, over the laughter of children playing in nearby yards, over the Christmas carols drifting from open windows. Emma spotted her first. She tugged on Lily's sleeve and pointed toward the woman standing alone on the corner. "Why is she just standing there?" Lily asked, her voice filled with the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "Maybe she's lost," Emma suggested, her eyes wide with concern. The twins had been raised to be kind, to help others, to see the world through compassionate eyes because that's what their father had taught them despite his own hidden pain. They exchanged a look, that silent communication that twins seem to share, and made a decision without speaking a word. Before Daniel could notice, the girls slipped on their snow boots and grabbed their coats from the hooks by the door. They opened it quietly, stepping out into the cold evening air, their breath visible in small clouds as they made their way down the front path and onto the sidewalk. The woman didn't see them approaching at first, lost in her own thoughts, in memories of holding 2 tiny babies in her arms for only a few precious hours before circumstances beyond her control tore them away. When Emma called out to her, asking if she was okay, Sarah turned abruptly, startled by the small voices cutting through the silence of her contemplation. She looked down at the 2 girls standing before her, and her breath caught in her throat. They were beautiful, identical in every way, with eyes that sparkled with warmth and faces that radiated innocence. Sarah's hand flew to her chest as if to steady her racing heart. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at these children, who looked so much like she had imagined they would, who carried features she recognized from old photographs and mirrors, who were real and alive and standing right in front of her. "Are you okay, lady?" Lily asked again, her head tilted slightly to the side. "You look cold." Emma nodded in agreement. "It's Christmas Eve," she added. "You shouldn't be alone out here." Sarah managed to find her voice, though it trembled when she spoke. "I'm fine," she said softly, kneeling down to be at their eye level. "Just taking a walk." But the girls weren't convinced. Their father had taught them to notice when people were hurting, to extend kindness even to strangers, especially on a night like this. "You should come inside," Emma suggested, her face brightening with the idea. "We have hot chocolate." "And cookies," Lily added enthusiastically. "Daddy made them shaped like snowmen." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over, but forced them back. She wanted to run, to disappear, before this moment became too real, too overwhelming. But looking into their hopeful faces, she found she couldn't refuse. She couldn't walk away now, not when fate or destiny or whatever force controlled the universe had brought her to this exact spot at this exact time. "Okay," Sarah heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for a few minutes. The twins beamed, each taking one of her hands with complete trust, with the kind of openness that adults lose somewhere along the way to growing up. They led her up the front path, through the gate, and toward the house where warm light spilled from every window, where Christmas decorations hung with care, where somewhere inside their father was likely wondering where his daughters had gone. As Sarah crossed the threshold, guided by these two children who didn't know her but welcomed her anyway, she felt as though she was stepping across more than just a doorway. She was stepping into a life she had dreamed about, but never thought she'd actually touch, into a reality she had given up hope of ever experiencing. The living room was exactly as she had imagined a home should be, warm and lived in, with photographs covering every available surface and children's artwork taped proudly to the walls. "Make yourself comfortable," Emma instructed, gesturing toward the couch. "We'll get Daddy." Sarah's stomach dropped. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't prepared to face him after all these years, after everything that had happened, after the choice that had been made for her rather than by her. But before she could protest, before she could explain that maybe this was a mistake, the girls had already bounded toward the kitchen, calling out for their father with excited voices that echoed through the house. She stood frozen in the living room, surrounded by evidence of a life she wasn't part of Christmases she hadn't celebrated with them, of moments she had missed and could never get back. Her eyes moved from photograph to photograph, each one a dagger to her heart. The girls as babies, as toddlers on their first day of school, at birthday parties, at parks and beaches and everywhere in between. And in almost every photo there was Daniel, smiling despite the exhaustion she could see in his eyes, holding his daughters close, trying to be enough for two parents. Then her gaze fell on a photo that made her knees weak. It was older than the others, tucked slightly behind a more recent frame but still visible. In it, a younger Daniel stood beside a younger version of herself, both of them smiling at a college graduation, his arm around her shoulders, her head leaning slightly toward him. That photo shouldn't be there. After everything that happened, after the way they'd been torn apart, after the lies and the lawyers and the family who had intervened, she couldn't understand why he would keep that photograph where anyone could see it. "Daddy, Daddy," she heard Emma's voice from the kitchen. "There's a lady here. She was cold outside, so we invited her in." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, footsteps approaching, a door swinging open. Then Daniel's voice tinged with confusion and mild concern. "What lady? Where did you find her?" "Right outside," Lily explained. She looked sad. "But we gave her hot chocolate and now she's not alone anymore." Sarah turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her whole body trembling with anticipation and fear. She heard him before she saw him, heard the exact moment his footsteps faltered, heard his sharp intake of breath, heard the way time itself seemed to pause. Then he appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, still holding a dish towel in one hand, his eyes locked on her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. Daniel stood completely still, the color draining from his face as though he'd seen something impossible, something that couldn't be real, but was standing right there in his living room on Christmas Eve. The dish towel slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor unnoticed. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sarah watched his face transform through a series of emotions, shock giving way to disbelief, disbelief giving way to something that looked almost like hope, before hardening into something more guarded, more protective. "Sarah," he finally managed to say, her name coming out as barely more than a breath. His eyes moved from her to the twins and back again, as if trying to make sense of a puzzle that didn't fit together. "What are you doing here? How did you find us?" The girls looked between the two adults, sensing suddenly that this wasn't just a stranger their father was meeting, that there was something deeper happening, something they didn't understand but could feel in the tension that now filled the room. "Do you know her, Daddy?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. Daniel's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know her. We used to know each other a long time ago." Lily moved closer to her father, reaching for his hand. "Is she a friend?" she asked. The question hung in the air, complicated and loaded with history the girls couldn't comprehend. Sarah finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at Daniel with eyes that pleaded for understanding. "I know I shouldn't have come. I know you probably never wanted to see me again. But I had to. I had to know they were okay. I had to see them, even if just once." Daniel's expression flickered, something painful crossing his features. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah remembered from years ago when he was stressed or overwhelmed. "Girls," Daniel said, his voice carefully controlled, "go upstairs and play for a few minutes. The adults need to talk." "But Daddy," Emma protested, "it's Christmas Eve. We should all be together." Daniel's expression softened as he looked at his daughters. "I know, sweetie, but just give us a little bit. We'll call you down soon, I promise." The twins exchanged another of their wordless communications before reluctantly heading toward the stairs, casting curious glances back at Sarah as they climbed. Once the sound of their footsteps faded and a door closed upstairs, Daniel turned back to Sarah with an intensity that made her take a step backward. "You can't be here," he said, his voice low and rough. "You gave up that right 7 years ago. You signed the papers. You agreed." Sarah felt the words like physical blows, even though she had expected them, even though she knew they were coming. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, unchecked. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice breaking. "You know I didn't have a choice. Your family made sure of that. They told me I was unfit, that I had nothing to offer them, that you'd moved on and didn't want me anyway. They made me sign those papers in a hospital room when I could barely think straight, when I'd just given birth and was devastated, and alone." Daniel's expression shifted, confusion mixing with his anger. "What are you talking about?" he asked, taking a step closer. "My family. Sarah, you're the one who left. You disappeared for months, wouldn't return my calls, and then when I finally tracked you down, you'd already signed away your parental rights. You didn't want them. You didn't want us." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She stared at him in disbelief, her mind racing to comprehend what he was saying. "I disappeared," she repeated slowly. "Daniel, I never disappeared. I came home one day and you were gone. Your phone was disconnected. Your apartment was empty. I went to your family's house and they told me you'd moved away, that you wanted nothing to do with me, that I was a mistake you were trying to forget. I was 3 months pregnant and completely alone." Daniel's face went pale. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, that's not what happened. My father told me you'd left, that you wanted to pursue your career and didn't want to be tied down with a baby. He said you'd made your choice, and I needed to respect it." The pieces began falling into place, a horrible picture emerging from the fragments of truth they'd each been told. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "When did you find out I was pregnant with twins?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel's eyes widened. "I didn't know until they were born," he said quietly. "I got a call from the hospital saying you'd had complications during delivery and that you'd named me as the father. By the time I got there, you'd already signed the adoption papers. They told me you didn't want to see me." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping despite her efforts to hold it back. "I never signed adoption papers," she said. "I signed papers giving you full custody. They told me you were married, that you'd moved on, that your wife didn't want me in the picture. They said if I truly loved my babies, I'd let them have a stable home with 2 parents instead of disrupting their lives. I thought I was doing what was best for them. I thought you didn't want me anymore." Daniel sank onto the arm of the couch, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook slightly and Sarah realized he was crying. "My father," he said, his voice muffled. "My father did this. He never approved of us, never thought you were good enough for the family. When you got pregnant, he must have seen his chance to separate us for good." Sarah moved closer, her anger at what had been done to them mixing with sympathy for the man who had been deceived just as thoroughly as she had been. "They took 7 years from us," she whispered. 7 years of their lives that we can never get back. 7 years they grew up without knowing me. 7 years I spent thinking you hated me, thinking you'd replaced me, thinking my children were better off without me." Daniel looked up at her, his eyes red and filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "I never hated you," he said quietly. "I was angry, confused, hurt, but I never hated you. I kept that photo of us because I couldn't let go, because even after everything, even believing you'd abandoned us, some part of me couldn't stop loving you. The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Sarah's tears fell faster now, years of suppressed grief and longing breaking through the walls she'd built to survive. "I never stopped looking for you," she said. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I knew I was missing. I hired investigators, followed every lead, but your father covered the tracks well. It wasn't until he passed away 6 months ago that I finally found a paper trail. Someone at the law firm he'd used felt guilty and reached out to me with the truth." Daniel stood up, moving toward her with hesitant steps as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have fought harder, should have questioned what they told me, should have found you somehow." Sarah shook her head. "We were both victims," she said. "Your father manipulated us both, used our love for our children against us. He knew exactly what to say to make us each believe the other had walked away." They stood facing each other in the Christmas-decorated living room, the weight of 7 lost years pressing down on them. The truth finally revealed, but the damage already done. Upstairs they could hear the faint sounds of the twins playing, unaware that their entire understanding of their family was about to shift. Daniel reached out slowly, his hand hovering near Sarah's face, before gently touching her cheek, as if confirming she was real. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How do we fix this? How do we explain this to them?" Sarah leaned into his touch, starving for the connection she'd been denied for so long. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to try. If you'll let me, if you think they can forgive me for not being there, I want to be part of their lives. I want to be their mother, even if I have to earn that title all over again." Daniel's expression softened, the anger and hurt beginning to give way to something else, something that looked almost like relief. "They deserve to know the truth," he said. "They deserve to know their mother didn't abandon them, that you fought for them in the only way you knew how. And maybe," he added, his voice catching, "maybe we deserve a second chance too, not just as parents, but as the people we were before my father destroyed everything." Sarah felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time in 7 years, fragile and tentative but growing stronger with each passing moment. Before she could respond, they heard small footsteps on the stairs. The twins appeared, their earlier caution replaced with curiosity. Emma spoke first, her voice gentle. "Are you still fighting?" she asked. "Did we do something wrong by bringing her inside?" Daniel immediately moved toward his daughters, kneeling down to their level. "No, sweethearts," he said, pulling them both into a hug. "You did exactly the right thing. You showed kindness to someone who needed it, just like I taught you." The twins looked relieved but still confused. Lily looked at Sarah with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than a 7-year-old should. "Who is she really, Daddy?" she asked. "You said you used to know each other, but it seems like more than that. She looks at us the way you do when you're really happy and really sad at the same time." Daniel glanced at Sarah, a silent question passing between them. She nodded, giving him permission to share the truth, to take the first step toward healing the fracture that had divided their family. Daniel took a deep breath, his arms still around his daughters. "Girls," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "this is Sarah, and she's someone very special. She's the person who brought you into this world. She's your birth mother." The room fell silent, except for the soft playing of Christmas music from the kitchen radio. Emma and Lily looked at Sarah with wide eyes, processing this information with the seriousness it deserved. Sarah waited, her heart in her throat, terrified of rejection, of questions she didn't know how to answer, of the possibility that they might hate her for not being there. But then Emma did something unexpected. She walked over to Sarah and looked up at her with those intelligent, compassionate eyes. "Is that why you were standing outside looking sad?" she asked. "Because you missed us?" Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod as tears streamed down her face. Emma considered this for a moment, then turned to her sister. Lily walked over too, and the twins stood side by side in front of Sarah. "Daddy says everyone makes mistakes," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He says what matters is whether you try to fix them." "Did you try to fix it?" Sarah knelt down so she was at their level, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I tried so hard," she said, her voice breaking. I looked for you for 7 years. I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped loving you, even though we'd never met. I know that might be hard to understand, but from the moment I knew you existed, you were part of my heart." Emma reached out and touched Sarah's face with small fingers, wiping away a tear. "You have the same eyes as us," she observed. Sarah laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "I do," she agreed, "and your beautiful brown hair came from me too, and probably your love of Christmas cookies, if I had to guess." Lily smiled slightly at that. "Do you really love us?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. "Even though you don't know us?" "More than anything in the world," Sarah said without hesitation. "I know I wasn't there for birthdays or bedtimes or first days of school. I know I missed so much and I can never get that back. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here for everything going forward. So I'd like to know what your favorite colors are, what books you love to read, what makes you laugh. I'd like to be your mum, if you think you have room in your hearts for that." The twins looked at each other, engaging in that silent twin communication again. Then Emma turned to her father. "Daddy, can she stay for Christmas?" Daniel's eyes were wet with tears, but he was smiling. "If she wants to," he said, looking at Sarah with an expression that held forgiveness and possibility. If she wants to stay, she can. In fact, Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude and love. "I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be," she said. Lily suddenly grabbed Sarah's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Sarah's larger ones. "We should make more cookies then," she announced, "because now we have an extra person for Christmas and we need more treats." Emma nodded enthusiastically, taking Sarah's other hand. "And we can show you our rooms, and our toys, and the ornaments we made at school, and everything." Sarah let the girls pull her toward the kitchen, glancing back at Daniel as she went. He followed, and in his eyes she saw the ghost of the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago, the man she'd never stopped loving despite everything. In the kitchen, the girls directed Sarah to wash her hands before helping them roll out cookie dough. As she stood at the sink, she caught sight of her reflection in the window above it, and behind her reflection, she could see Daniel and the twins, see the family that had been stolen from her, but was now, miraculously, within reach. She thought about all the years she'd spent imagining this, dreaming about it, crying over the impossibility of it. And now here she was, covered in flour, laughing at something Emma said, feeling Lily's small hand pat her arm. Daniel moved to stand beside her at the counter, their shoulders nearly touching as they cut cookies into shapes of stars and trees and snowmen. Every time their hands brushed, Sarah felt a jolt of electricity, a reminder of what they'd once had, what might be possible again if they were brave enough to try. The girls chattered endlessly, telling Sarah about their school and their friends, asking her questions about where she lived and what she did for work, accepting her presence with a grace that left Sarah in awe. As the evening progressed, they decorated the cookies with icing and sprinkles, making a spectacular mess of the kitchen. Daniel put on Christmas carols, and Lily insisted on teaching Sarah a dance they'd learned at school. Emma grabbed her father's hands and pulled him into the dance as well, and suddenly they were all moving around the kitchen in a chaotic, joyful celebration that felt more like family than Sarah had experienced in 7 long years. When the cookies were done and decorated, they carried plates of them into the living room and settled around the Christmas tree. The twins sat on either side of Sarah on the couch, leaning against her as if they'd always done so, as if 7 years hadn't passed, as if she'd been there all along. Daniel sat in the armchair across from them, watching with an expression that was equal parts wonder and disbelief, as if he too couldn't quite believe this was really happening. "Tell us about when we were babies," Emma requested, looking up at Sarah with curious eyes. "Were we cute? Did we cry a lot?" Sarah's throat tightened with emotion as she thought about the brief hours she'd spent with them before they'd been taken away. "You were the most beautiful babies I'd ever seen," she said softly. "Emma, you were born first, just 2 minutes before your sister. You came out crying but calmed down as soon as they put you on my chest. And Lily, you were so quiet at first, just looking around with these big alert eyes, like you were trying to figure out your new world right away." "What else?" Lily pressed, snuggling closer. Sarah glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. "I held you both at the same time," she continued, her voice thick with memory. "You were so tiny, so perfect. I counted all your fingers and toes, kissed both your foreheads, told you how much I loved you and how sorry I was that I couldn't keep you with me. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you to your father who I believed had a better life to offer you. But not a single day went by when I didn't think about you, didn't wonder what you were doing, didn't wish I could see you." The twins absorbed this information solemnly. Then Emma asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Why didn't you come find us sooner?" Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because I was told that it was best for you if I stayed away," she explained. "I was told that your father had a new family and that showing up would only confuse and hurt you. I believed that the most loving thing I could do was let you be happy without me disrupting your lives. But I should have tried harder. I should have fought more. That's something I'll always regret." "But you're here now," Lily said, reaching up to touch Sarah's face. "That's what matters, right? Daddy always says it's never too late to do the right thing." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Your father is a very wise man," she said, meeting Daniel's eyes across the room. He held her gaze, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a forgiveness, a tentative rebuilding of what had been destroyed. As the evening wore on, they watched a Christmas movie together, the girls eventually falling asleep against Sarah, one on each side. Sarah sat perfectly still, afraid to move and wake them, savoring the weight of them against her, the trust they'd so quickly given her. Daniel watched them from his chair, his expression soft and contemplative. When he was certain the girls were deeply asleep, he spoke quietly. "I never stopped loving you," he said, the words hanging in the air between them. "Even when I thought you'd left us, even when I was angry and hurt, some part of me never let go." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered back. "I dated other people, tried to move on, but no one ever came close to what we had. You and these girls, you've been my heart all along, even when I couldn't be near you." Daniel stood and carefully lifted Emma in his arms. Sarah did the same with Lily, and together they carried the sleeping twins upstairs to their bedroom. It was decorated in soft purples and pinks, with twin beds adorned with matching quilts. They tucked the girls in, and Sarah couldn't resist gently brushing the hair back from each of their foreheads, bending to kiss them softly. "Sweet dreams, my darlings," she whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up." Back downstairs, Sarah and Daniel stood in the living room, suddenly alone together for the first time in 7 years. The Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow over them, and from somewhere outside, church bells began to ring, announcing Christmas Day had arrived. "We have a lot to figure out," Daniel said, moving closer to her. "Custody arrangements, how to explain this to everyone, how to help the girls adjust. But Sarah, I want to figure it out together. I want us to be a family again, the way we should have been all along." Sarah nodded, reaching for his hands and holding them tightly. "I want that too," she said. "I know it won't be easy. I know there will be challenges and questions and probably some difficult moments, but I'm not running away again. I'm not letting anyone separate us this time. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm here. I'm committed to you and to those beautiful girls sleeping upstairs." Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Sarah melted into the embrace, feeling like she'd finally come home after a long, painful journey. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the glow of the Christmas tree, mourning the years they'd lost, but celebrating the miracle of this moment, of finding each other again, of having a second chance that neither of them had believed possible. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel cupped Sarah's face in his hands. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Merry Christmas," she echoed. "And thank you for believing me, for understanding what really happened, for being willing to try again." They talked for hours that night, filling in the gaps of 7 years, sharing stories and memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. Sarah told him about the tiny apartment she'd lived in, working 2 jobs to save money for lawyers and investigators, about the nights she'd spent scrolling through social media trying to catch a glimpse of her children. Daniel told her about the exhaustion of single parenting, about the nights he'd questioned everything, about how he'd thrown himself into being the best father he could be because he was determined his daughters would never feel like they were missing anything. As Christmas morning dawned, Sarah was still there, curled up on the couch where she'd fallen asleep talking to Daniel. She woke to the sound of excited squeals and opened her eyes to find Emma and Lily racing down the stairs, still in their pajamas. They stopped short when they saw her, as if confirming she hadn't been a dream. "You're still here," Emma said, her face breaking into a huge smile. Sarah sat up, smoothing her hair. "I promised I would be," she said. Lily ran over and grabbed her hand. "Come see what Santa brought us," she insisted, pulling Sarah toward the tree. Under it were presents wrapped in colorful paper, and Sarah felt a pang of regret that she hadn't been there to help choose and wrap them. But Daniel seemed to read her mind. "There's something for you too," he said quietly, handing her a small wrapped box. "I bought this years ago," he explained. "For the Christmas I hoped you'd come back. I've kept it every year since." Sarah opened it with trembling fingers to find a delicate silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of two intertwined hearts. Engraved on the back were 3 words, "Always and forever." She couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but hold it and cry while Daniel fastened it around her neck. The girls watched with solemn faces, beginning to understand the depth of what their parents had been through, what they'd lost and found again. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur of joy. They opened presents together, cooked a simple but delicious Christmas dinner, played games and sang carols around the piano that sat in the corner of the living room. Sarah soaked in every moment, every laugh, every touch, every shared glance with Daniel, knowing how close she'd come to never having this, to spending the rest of her life wondering and regretting. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Daniel raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To second chances," he said. "To families that find their way back to each other. To the courage of 2 little girls who saw someone in need and invited her in. And to love that survives even when everything tries to destroy it." They all clinked glasses, even the twins, who were beginning to understand that something special had happened, that their family had grown in a way they'd never expected but somehow always needed. Later, after the girls were in bed again, Sarah and Daniel stood on the front porch looking out at the snow-covered street where Sarah had stood just 24 hours earlier, alone and terrified, and hoping for a glimpse of the children she'd lost. So much had changed in one day. So much had been revealed, forgiven and rebuilt. She leaned against Daniel's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her waist. "What happens next?" she asked, voicing the question that had been hovering in her mind. "Do I go home tonight? Do we take this slowly? How do we navigate this new reality?" Daniel turned to face her, his hands on her shoulders. "I think," he said carefully, "that we take it one day at a time. I think we communicate. We're honest. We put the girls first, but also don't forget about ourselves. I think we go to counseling, work through our trauma, figure out how to co-parent, and maybe, eventually, figure out if we can be more than that again." Sarah nodded. "That sounds perfect," she said. "I don't need all the answers right now. I just need to know that this is real, that I'm not going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "It's real," he promised. "You're not going anywhere. We're not letting you go again. The girls already love you, I can see it. And he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm falling in love with you all over again, even though I don't think I ever really stopped." Inside the house, from one of the upstairs windows, Emma and Lily watched their parents standing together on the porch, watched the way they looked at each other, watched the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle. "We did good," Emma whispered to her sister. "We invited her in and now we have a mom." Lily nodded, smiling. "Santa brought us the best present," she agreed. "Not just toys, but a whole family." In the days and weeks that followed, Sarah became a regular presence in the house on Maple Street. She started slowly, with afternoon visits that stretched into dinners, then sleepovers in the guest room, then eventually a more permanent arrangement. The girls adapted beautifully, their resilient hearts opening wide to include this woman who had given them life and then been forced to let them go. They asked questions, lots of questions, and Sarah answered them all honestly, age-appropriately, with patience and love. Daniel and Sarah attended counseling together, working through the betrayal and manipulation they'd endured, learning how to trust again, how to communicate better, how to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It wasn't always easy. There were difficult conversations, tears, moments of frustration and fear. But they persisted, committed to making it work, committed to giving their daughters the intact family they deserved. 6 months after that Christmas Eve, Daniel proposed again, on the same beach where he'd proposed the first time, 9 years earlier. This time Sarah said yes with no shadows hanging over them, no disapproving family members plotting in the background, no misunderstandings or manipulations. Just two people who had loved each other, lost each other and found their way back, choosing to build a future together. They were married in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Emma and Lily serving as flower girls and junior bridesmaids, beaming with pride as they watched their parents exchange vows. Sarah promised to be the mother the girls deserved, to make up for lost time not by dwelling on the past, but by being fully present in every moment going forward. Daniel promised to never let anyone come between them again, to protect their family fiercely, to honor the second chance they'd been given. As Sarah stood in that backyard wearing a simple white dress, holding Daniel's hands while their daughters watched with joyful tears, she thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, lost, broken, convinced she'd never see her children, never have the family she'd dreamed of. And she thought about how everything had changed in a single moment, when two compassionate little girls had seen someone alone on Christmas Eve and made the simple, beautiful decision to invite her inside. That invitation had been the beginning of healing, the start of a journey back to wholeness, the opening of a door that had seemed permanently closed. It had given Sarah her children, her love, her life back. It had reunited a family that should never have been separated in the first place. And it had proven that sometimes the greatest gifts come not wrapped in paper under a tree, but in the form of second chances, of truth revealed, of love that refuses to die no matter how hard the world tries to kill it. This story, though fictional, is based on the very real experiences of families torn apart by manipulation, misunderstanding, and external interference. It reflects the pain of separation, the joy of reunion, and the incredible resilience of love. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances and the power of truth, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories of hope, healing, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. By subscribing, you'll be joining a community that believes in the power of love to overcome even the most devastating circumstances. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be part of our family as we continue to share stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us all that it's never too late for a new beginning. Thank you for watching, and may your own story be filled with love, truth, and the courage to never give up on what matters most.